Egypt, 150 years ago. A gang of tomb raiders, led by the infamous Rasul brothers, make an extraordinary discovery. High on these cliffs, they uncover a secret shaft cut deep into the limestone, a gateway into a hidden world. At the bottom is a tomb, undisturbed for thousands of years. And inside, more than 50 mummies. Nothing like it had ever been found before. British Egyptologist Dr. Chris Naunton is on the trail of an ancient Egyptian mystery.
What I can see is a shaft, a deep shaft cut directly into the rock, goes down about 20 meters, about 60 feet, and it leads to a network of tunnels. And these extend for about 100 meters, 300 feet, something like that. And in the walls of these tunnels, there are niches, kind of side chambers.
The discovery is known today as the Royal Cache. Among the mummies are 10 pharaohs, including some of the greatest names of ancient Egypt. But alongside legendary kings like Ramesses the Great and Seti I is a little-known pharaoh whose reign is shrouded in mystery. Sekenenre Tao.
Sekenenre isn't as famous as some of his successors like Ramesses the Great or Seti I, but the fact that he was buried alongside those pharaohs suggests that for the ancient Egyptians, he was every bit a part of that line of great kings.
Who is this mystery pharaoh buried among the greats? The first clue, an inscription on the lid of his coffin. Sekenenre the Brave. Why the brave? Hidden inside the coffin was a mummy the likes of which had never been seen before.
When we look at the front of his face, it certainly doesn't look normal. It's very distorted. You may just be able to see the ends of the nose there, but the whole of the nose, the eye on the right, the bridge of the nose, the eye on the left are all very distorted.
Sekenenre is unique. He's the only mummified pharaoh ever found with such violent injuries. Dr. Richard Shepard is a world-renowned forensic pathologist. His specialty? The investigation of suspicious deaths.
These are the two wounds to the right side of Sekenenre's head. This is a wound where actually a piece of the skull has been forced in. It's been smashed into his brain underneath this, producing this large crater-like effect. This wound has a slightly different appearance, partly because I think a bit of the bone has broken off, possibly as the weapon was removed. It's flipped a piece of the outer part of the skull off. But this too has actually cut through. It's punched into the skull.
A mutilated mummy with an heroic epitaph. Understanding how he died is the key to unlocking the secrets of his life. Dr. Shepard turns to the only full autopsy ever performed on the body. It was carried out 100 years ago by anatomist Elliot Smith. His conclusions? Sekenenre died from axe wounds received in battle. Dr. Shepard is taking a closer look at Smith's report.
Elliot Smith says axe in his report, and I'd back it up forensically from our knowledge now. When I look at these two injuries, What I can say is that they are both lethal wounds, and you'd probably only need one of them to cause death, but the two together are a certain cause of death.
The experts agree on the cause of death. Fatal axe blows to the head. But did he receive these wounds on the battlefield? And if so, why risk a pharaoh's life on the front line? In the search for answers, Egyptologist Chris Naunton picks up the pharaoh's trail.
There's very little evidence for Seqenenre and his reign. We know of a broken limestone doorway and a couple of stones mentioning his name. But all in all, relative to other kings, we have very, very little of him at all.
Ramesses the Great built gigantic statues of himself. And Seti I constructed this magnificent temple. But monuments to Seqenenre are hard to find.
I think the reason why we have so little evidence for him is perhaps to do with the fact that he didn't reign for very long, so he didn't have very much opportunity to record his name. But perhaps the best ways of doing this, of stamping your mark on your territory, would be to build a temple, for example. We know, or as far as we can tell, he didn't do that.
Also unusual is the way Seqenenre was cared for after death. Egyptologist Dr. Campbell Price.
You would expect around this time the king or any high elite person to be mummified after death. Seqenenre is in a contorted state. Something clearly has gone wrong with the process of embalming, but also with the arrangement of the body. No attempt has been made to compose the features, even to straighten the limbs out, but they're quite contorted from that final assault.
A violent death. A substandard mummification. And no grand monuments in his name. But ancient evidence does yield two important clues pushing the investigation forward. First, Seqenenre's reign was short. Second, he ruled at a time when Egypt was under siege. Foreign invaders occupy the north. They are known as the Hyksos. Seqenenre, a pharaoh of ancient Egypt whose reign is still shrouded in mystery. His body bears the marks of a violent death, and his mummy is poorly preserved. For Egyptologist Campbell Price, it suggests the embalming was rushed and incomplete.
You can tell immediately that something has gone wrong with the embalming of Seqenenre. The body has not been treated in a manner you would expect.
In ancient Egypt, mummification was a sacred ritual. The brain was removed, and salt was used to preserve the body. A painstaking process that took several weeks to complete. None of this happened with Seqenenre.
The fact that he's so contorted, his brain hasn't been removed, and he's not been treated with salt, strongly suggests that he was embalmed in a hurry, in difficult circumstances, probably on a battlefield.
Seqenenre was badly mummified following a violent death. So far, the evidence points to a battlefield. But Dr. Shepard is finding other clues.
If a body had been left on a battlefield for any length of time, I would have expected to see what's called animal predation, marks where animals small and large had attacked the body.
Their populations have since declined, but vultures once circled the skies above Egypt. The aftermath of any battle would offer rich pickings for these hungry scavengers. But forensic examination reveals all the pharaoh's wounds were inflicted by weapons.
So the absence of any evidence on Seqen-Enre's body of this animal predation says to me that there is no way he has lain on a battlefield for any significant period of time, if at all.
If not on the battlefield, where did Seqen-Enre die? And who had the means and the motive to kill him? Seqen-Enre rules an empire in deep trouble. Egypt is besieged on all sides. His immediate predecessors have failed to secure the nation's borders, and large parts of his kingdom are occupied by foreign enemies.
When Seqen-Enre was on the throne, he ruled over a territory that was only a fraction of the size that it would have been under the rule of previous kings. So the glory days really were over by this point. Egypt and the territory that Seqen-Enre controlled was not the same size as it would have been in the age of the pyramids before him.
Egypt is being squeezed from above and below. For Seqen-Enre, the immediate danger lies in the north, where the Hyksos rule over the fertile Nile Delta from their capital, Avaris. They have a stranglehold on the trade routes and are starving Seqen-Enre of resources. As Dr. Gary Shaw explains, the Hyksos far outclass the Egyptians in military might.
The Hyksos brought with them, when they were expanding their territory, advanced technology compared to what the Egyptians had. The main one was probably chariots, which the Egyptians didn't have at this time.
And the advanced Hyksos armory doesn't stop there. Their soldiers use the lethal composite bow. Made from wood and buffalo horn, it outperforms the simple Egyptian bow in both range and killing power.
And the Egyptians were outmatched in every possible way when it came to their military technology.
Threatened by an enemy as powerful as the Hyksos, Seqen-Enre faces a stark choice. Live under the control of the occupiers, or risk everything in a war to drive them out.
The Egyptians suddenly woke up to the situation surrounding them, that they were now outmatched militarily, and the only way to solve this problem was to develop their society in a more militaristic way.
So what was Seqen-Enre's decision? Chris Naunton is on his trail. Archaeologists have been excavating at Deir el-Balas for over 100 years. Among these ruins, they made an extraordinary find. A door frame bearing the name Seqen-Enre Tau. This was once the site of a grand palace, built in the style of an imposing fortress. If this is Seqen-Enre's lost outpost, it's not the work of a weak and cowering king.
This would have been an incredibly impressive sight in its day. These walls were massive. They stood 2 stories high, and they would have been covered with a layer of fine, bright white plaster. All of this would have created a gleaming vision in the desert, an incredibly impressive sight.
This palace was built to last. Parts of it are still standing 3,000 years later.
This is one of the massive walls that makes up the remains of the northern palace of Seqenenre. And the palace would have been built of mud brick, in fact. You can see those bricks here. But although it's made of mud, that might not sound very impressive, but actually mud brick was the material that the ancient Egyptians used for all of their domestic buildings, from the very simplest up to royal palaces like this. And actually, in this case, the bricks are very large. This is one of them on its side here. And they're very finely made as well. So these would have been the sort of highest quality bricks. And it's incredible to think that although it's a ruin now, these were made by a craftsman 3,500 years ago. And they're still standing today. It just gives you a sense of how durable this material was.
This structure wasn't just strong, it was huge.
Well, I have here a plan of Seqenenre's palace at Teralbalis, and you can see the full extent of what he was building. Not just the northern palace, but the whole of the landscape, and crucially, a second really substantial building of his, a southern palace built on the top of a hill overlooking the Nile. This would have given Seqenenre a commanding view of his enemies from the north. This is the Hyksos, of course, who for decades had been controlling the territory to the north of this part of the world. This was a settlement of some considerable size, and the fortifications, of course, suggest to us that there would have been a substantial military presence here as well. So it's not impossible that we could be talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of people settled here, all part of Seqenenre's efforts.
It's a symbol of power, built to impress.
He would have spent some time gazing north, we can imagine, contemplating his enemy, contemplating what would be the defining moment of not just his reign, but of the period.
Seqenenre's palace is built like a fortress, leaving no one in any doubt about his intentions.
This palace is very much about making a statement. It's a symbol of power and strength, but the military dimension to this suggests that from the very beginnings of his reign, he had war on his mind.
But all conflicts need a trigger. What was the flashpoint for Seqenenre's war? The answer may lie hidden in an ancient text. Seqenenre is a pharaoh under siege. The Hyksos and their armies occupy the north of Egypt. At his palace at Deir al-Balas, the pharaoh prepares for a war of resistance. But who makes the first move? Seqenenre or the Hyksos? A 3,000-year-old papyrus may hold the answer.
The ancient texts tell us that Seqenenre had a quarrel with the Hyksos king, Apophis. And Apophis sent a message down to Thebes to say that he was terribly annoyed because some hippopotami that Seqenenre was keeping in a pool were making so much noise that it was keeping him awake at night.
It's apparently on this strange pretext that Seqenenre declares war on the Hyksos. But something doesn't add up. Apophis is hundreds of miles away, and very few leaders would go to war over noisy hippos. One explanation may lie in the mistranslation of the ancient Egyptian word for hippo, which sounds like the word for soldier.
If Apophis' request was for Seqenenre to remove his soldiers, and that would make sense if he was amassing his troops at that time, ready for battle. Now, however we interpret that, Seqenenre's response to Apophis' request was to launch all-out war against the Hyksos.
It's Seqenenre who makes the first move. The question is, why? To find the answer, Chris Naunton is investigating the carvings on the temple of Medinet Habu. Over thousands of years, the ancient Egyptians recorded their beliefs in stone, including what was expected of their godlike pharaohs.
As you move through the temple, the architecture alters subtly, and the decoration begins to change as well. You get scenes that concern almost exclusively the king and his interaction with the gods.
Chris Naunton believes these reliefs outline all that is expected of a pharaoh in ancient Egypt.
This is exactly the kind of thing that I've been looking for. This is the kind of motif that gives us an idea of what a pharaoh like Seqenenre's role would have been in the Egyptian cosmos. You have an image of the king, one either side of the doorway, and above them are standing two gods, in this case Thoth on the right-hand side and Horus on the left, and they're holding these kind of cords, but at the end of these cords you can see the motifs for the lotus and papyrus, and these are symbolic of Upper and Lower Egypt, the two kingdoms of Egypt. And these two gods are tying these together. And so this is symbolic of this incredibly important part of what the king does for Egypt, unifying these two lands, bringing them together. And this, of course, is something that Seqenenre would have recognized and something he himself would have wanted to achieve.
With Upper Egypt in the grip of the Hyksos, Seqenenre is failing in his duty to his gods and his people. As pharaoh, he has no choice but to confront Egypt's enemies and drive them from his lands.
There is a sense from the surviving record that he kicks off this liberation war against the Hyksos. So I imagine he's quite a gung-ho kind of chap. He will sense, as a pharaoh, that he has to step into the moment. It's fight or flight. He has to show that he is a king.
But what kind of king? A brave warrior on the front lines? Or something else? Seqenenre, an Egyptian pharaoh with a dream to liberate his homeland and restore its glory. He builds an immense fortified palace. His massing of troops outrages the Hyksos king. Seqenenre uses this as a justification to declare war. To move his army to the front line, he takes advantage of one of his greatest assets, the Nile.
It's very likely that Seqenenre had a fleet of large vessels in order to transport the large numbers of men, his recruits for his army, from his base here to engage with the Hyksos. The evidence that we have suggests that the kind of boats that Seqenenre would have made use of would have had sails, but also oarsmen for those days when the wind wasn't particularly helpful.
When Seqenenre took his armies to war, Did he lead from the front? And if he did, were his fatal wounds inflicted on the battlefield? In the ancient temple of Medinet Habu, Dr. Chris Naunton is looking for answers carved into the stones. Depictions of armed men. Terrible violence. Images of a pharaoh in the heat of battle.
One of the themes that's the commonest in a temple like this is of Pharaoh conquering his enemies, and that's exactly what we can see here. Pharaoh's shown on the left, almost twice the size of his captured enemies here, and he's holding them by the hair. And this is conveying the message to whoever saw this, that Pharaoh is the mightiest, the most powerful, in full control over his foreign enemies. But whether or not this would have borne any relation to reality is open to some question.
Gripping his victims by the hair and preparing to strike. Smiting. Brutal justice visited by a pharaoh on his enemies. But how true to life is this portrayal of a pharaoh at war?
You've got to take anything that's represented on an Egyptian temple wall with a few pinches of salt. These are idealized images, images for the gods, images for eternity, images that do not clearly relate always to reality. You can't show him weak, you can't show him indecisive. You show him victorious and glorious and always with the upper hand. That is the nature of Egyptian monuments. That's the nature of Egyptian monumental presentation.
A different picture emerges back at the Cairo Museum.
The mummies that we have closest in time to Second Enres, none of them have any signs that can be attributed to wounds inflicted during campaigning. Great warrior pharaohs like Thutmose III, Amenhotep II, King Ahmose, these are all described as great warriors. But when you look at the mummies, there's nothing to indicate a lifetime spent fighting enemies on the battlefield.
Of all these pharaohs with warrior reputations, only Second Enre has wounds inflicted by a battle axe. But there are inconsistencies in the evidence. And for Dr. Shepard, the forensics just aren't adding up.
The only information we have about the wounds on Second Enre are produced by Elliot Smith from his post-mortem report from 1912. And what he says in his report is, the absence of any injuries to the arms or to any other part of the body shows that no resistance could have been offered to the attack. Now that's really very interesting forensically, because normally you would expect someone in the middle of a melee, in the middle of a battle, to receive injuries from many parts once they begin to go down, certainly, and for them to try and defend themselves against those injuries. And these are what we call defensive injuries. And the commonest ones are on the arms and legs, particularly the ulna, the outer border of the arm, where the arms are raised and blows might be struck against it. There are gripping injuries to the hands as they grab the ends of swords or knives. All sorts of injuries distributed throughout the body. So looking at the injuries that Second Enre has, the complete absence of any injuries elsewhere in the body, the focus of the injury to the head, suggests to me that he was nowhere near the front line of a battle.
And it's not just Dr. Shepard's analysis that suggests the pharaoh didn't die fighting. Chris Naunton is finding supporting evidence in the carvings on these temple walls.
Pharaoh is the most important person in the Egyptian world, of course. It would have been far too risky to have him in direct contact with his foes like this. He would have been perhaps on the battlefield, but some way away, protected by bodyguards. This is all about propaganda. It's a message showing you symbolically that he's at the powerful head of the army. But in fact, this wouldn't really have been what you would have been seeing if you were actually there with him.
The investigation has reached a turning point. If not on the battlefield, How did Second Enre die? And who delivered the fatal blows? Dr. Gary Shaw has a theory.
It seems to me that Second Enre must have been captured following the loss of a battle. And I think ceremonial execution is probably the best explanation for the way that he received these wounds, but doesn't have wounds anywhere else on his body.
Smiting, or the ceremonial execution of captive enemies by a war leader, was a brutal way to die. Gripped by the hair, struck with an axe or sword. According to Gary Shaw, this is a fate that even the pharaoh himself could suffer.
Second Enre would have been captured following the loss of the battle, and the enemy commander wanted to make a show of this defeated enemy. We can imagine the troops, the Hyksos, perhaps being lined up in front, witnessing this execution.
The wounds on the mummy paint a horrifying picture.
We have three seemingly different weapons used on the body of Second Enre. One is a Hyksos-style Asiatic bronze battle axe.
The Hyksos axe. With its distinctive flared bronze blade, it can easily cut through flesh and bone.
The other one is an Egyptian-style axe.
The Egyptian axe. Simpler than its Hyksos equivalent, but with a much broader cutting blade.
And then what might be a spear or a dagger.
The narrow bronze spear could easily puncture bone and muscle.
First blow would have been the one above the right eye. It comes at roughly the right height, I would think, as if Second Enre was kneeling and bound, so the person standing could swing the axe directly into the head. And then we get the wound below the left eye, which is made with the same weapon, this Hyksos-style battle axe. Then he might have turned the weapon around and used the handle of the weapon to create the great, heavy, blunt wound that crushed the right eye socket and destroyed part of the face. Then it would seem that his display might have been finished, that the guy using the Hyksos weapon would step aside, and maybe a vassal, an Egyptian working with the Hyksos, used an Egyptian-style weapon to create the great long horizontal wound at the upper forehead.
The idea that different weapons cause different wounds has always intrigued historians. The broad Egyptian axe producing a long wound, and a more rounded puncture that looks to be made with the narrow Hyksos axe. The possibility that there are wounds made by weapons from both sides of the warring factions further fuels the debates surrounding Second Enre's death. The small stab to the neck is most likely from a spear, a weapon used by both sides.
We then have the last wound, the one below the left ear. It'd be quite easy to stick a spear into the side of Second Enre and finish him off.
But did this finish him off? Dr. Richard Shepard is investigating this small stab wound at the side of the pharaoh's neck.
The track of the wound has passed into the back of the left side of the neck. It's been a real chance injury that's cut through.
This injury, so close to the spinal cord, has huge implications for when and where Second Enre met his death.
when we look at the front of his face, we know from the x-rays there's extensive bony damage lying beneath these, but these injuries are not recent. They've healed.
Dr. Shepard is not convinced by Gary Shaw's timeline.
Healing to this extent takes time. It doesn't happen in a day or two. It happens over several weeks or even months. And so we have two lots of injuries here. We have some old injuries to his face, which have healed, having caused severe damage, and we have recent injuries to his head that have caused his death.
A different story is emerging. The facial wounds from an initial attack heal and are followed much later by fatal blows to the pharaoh's head. The key to this new theory is the small wound to the spine. It paints a startling new picture of Seqenenre's final moments.
The person would be lying on the ground. They would probably be semi-conscious initially. They may remain conscious, but they will be paralyzed from the neck downwards. So instant paralysis is going to follow an injury such as this.
The contorted body of Seqenenre lies alongside some of the great pharaohs in the Cairo Museum. His death was violent. But Dr. Richard Shepard believes he didn't die on a battlefield. He is re-examining a stab wound in the pharaoh's neck. He believes it was inflicted at the same time as the injuries to the face. But long before the fatal blows to his head.
This is a picture that was taken contemporaneously with Elliot Smith's autopsy in 1912. And what it shows actually is the base of the skull. And this big hole here is the hole at the base of the skull called the foramen magnum. And what you can see here is a discontinuity of that circle. This is normal, this is abnormal on the left. The skull at its base is damaged at that point.
The damage was caused by a spear as it penetrated the pharaoh's neck.
Now, I think that's significant because if we look at it on this computer visualization of a healthy, normal human, here we can see the brain stem is here at this point. All of the nerves that control the body pass through that point of the brain.
An injury here can sever the nerves, leaving the victim alive, but paralyzed from the neck down. Was this Seqenenre's fate? Long-term paralysis changes the body.
And the main change that can be seen is the effect on the muscles of the body. We have muscles that bend our hands forwards and back. And after time, when you have a damage to the neck, the stronger muscles in the arms pull the hands over like this. And these are called contractures. And Seqenenre's hands show this classic distortion, this classic contracture effect, indicating that he has had damage to his nerves not just an hour before, not just a day before, but a long time before his death.
Dr. Shepard's theory relies on Seqenenre surviving an initial attack, with injuries to the left cheek, the right eye, and the side of the neck. But although horrific, they were not the cause of death. Dr. Shepard believes the fatal blows were struck long after.
What I conceive is that Second Enre was lying in his bed, immobile, unable to do anything.
It's a chilling scenario. The pharaoh returns from battle paralyzed from the neck down. And when his killer finally draws near, Second Enre is powerless to defend himself.
That he couldn't move his hands. He couldn't move his legs. I think an assailant has come up to him, lying in bed, and from Second Enre's right-hand side has delivered at least 2 very severe blows. That would have been immediately fatal.
We Egyptologists tend to think that we're almost the sole guardians of the story of what happened in ancient Egypt, but when you get a new perspective from somebody who's looking coldly at the evidence before them, in this case the mummy of Second Enre, I think we have to be open to changing our views, and I'm happy actually that the interpretation we have here is certainly a possibility.
The final mystery. Who killed Second Enre? And why? Perhaps he was a Hyksos assassin, or a palace insider, sent to remove a once great pharaoh, now powerless to lead his kingdom. Whatever the circumstances, Second Enre's death would not be in vain. The war he began was eventually won. Within 60 years of his death, the Hyksos were defeated, and the Kingdom of Egypt reunited.
Second Enre's contribution to Egyptian history is massive. Although he wasn't able to complete the task himself, he set the stage for his sons to do that, which they did successfully. And in so doing, they reunified the country. They were only able to have the reigns that they had thanks to his actions.
The full story behind Second Enre's death and rushed mummification may never be known. Killed in battle, struck down in a brutal display of power, or disposed of after months of suffering. Second Enre deserves to be recognized alongside the other great pharaohs of Egypt.
I think Second Enre's role in Egyptian history is vastly underestimated. He played such a key position in reunifying the country. He started this process.
Second Enre gives the motivation, the impetus for later kings to eventually expel the Hyksos and start the new kingdom. And then you get household names like Thutmose III and Tutankhamun and Ramses II. Had Second Enre not done what he did, you probably wouldn't get the new kingdom, which is an interesting thought.
Second Enre paid the ultimate price in the struggle to free his kingdom. But he began the fight that allowed the pharaohs who succeeded him to rule a unified Egypt for another 1,000 years. This fallen king earned his epitaph, Second Enre, the Brave.